We are going to try this again. This is my third attempt at going live this morning, and I keep saying I swear that yay, and you can hear me now and we're all good. Um I keep saying I swear Mercury's in retrograde. It's a full moon every night or every day of the week. I don't know what is going on in the world, and yay, people can hear me. You try to be all fancy and get a new microphone, and apparently you just use the old one. So, um, welcome. Somebody had sent me, I think I said on Facebook Live yesterday that I swear Mercury's in retrograde or something weird's going on. And somebody sent me a message that Venus is in retrograde. So I don't know what that means. But weird stuff. But yeah, it's a lot of heavy stuff going on in the world right now, and really difficult, heavy topics. And I saw that the police officer who murdered um, this poor human being, his wife filed for divorce yesterday. And I was saying to one of my friends this morning, um, she's probably the newest member of our group, and it's hard for me to talk about it without crying. I can't imagine what that woman lived through. I love law enforcement so much. My stepson is a police officer. I have lots of really close friends and family members who are police officers, and but on the other side, those bad apples, some of my coaching clients are going through divorces with police officers, and they can be some of the most difficult to go up against. So it's like with anything, any systematic government, thing, you've got the good ones and the bad ones. And so really, really heavy stuff this week, and it's had a big effect. Abuse culture in our society is sickening. He tries to keep me down financially so I can't be independent. Those are some of the comments that are coming through. And let's see, D is divorcing a covert narcissist after being a stay-at-home mom. And it sounds like the financial abuse aspect that spoke on that post-separation abuse wheel is so rampant in this realm. And I think to some degree all of us feel that. Different areas, there are people who are have been stay-at-home moms for all these years, to support the family, to support their spouse's career, and then it comes back to haunt them in a situation like this. I know that around the time my marriage ended, we had experienced financial collapse of our businesses, our livelihood, and so I found myself in a similar position. um, Gigi says, being a police officer is difficult. Many have addictions, but there are definitely men and women who get off on the power trip. Absolutely. Such a big topic. And I don't know that anyone has the answers, but I do think it is so important for us to talk about. And I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. My ex used and continues to use financial abuse. Divorce finalized February 18th, 2020. Good for you. But the post-separation abuse, I know so many people get so stuck on that date, that when the divorce is final. I know for me, it took about 2 years before we went from start to, the ink on the signature of the judge on that divorce decree. And I actually threw a huge party, really big one actually, because it was a milestone. But the reality is that piece of paper, and what I quickly learned, it doesn't change anything. As long as you share children with this person and you're in the system until your kids age out, That's, and even then I hear stories where through college or weddings or whatever comes up in the lives of your kids, it can still continue to some degree, and so, but the beauty of having your kids age out of the system, you can use that beautiful little block function on your phone and have zero contact. So, goals. Um, Angie says, love your TikToks. It's a more light-hearted platform for these issues. Yes, thank you, Angie. And I don't know if you found me through TikTok, but one of the girls who works with me, Laska, has been saying forever, you need to get on TikTok. And I'm like, I don't even know what TikTok is. My 15-year-old has it, and so I have an account because of that. But, I find, I take it for granted that everybody knows what this is, everybody is aware, but that's not true, through that TikTok platform, and I'm doing these cute little live video, or not live, but fun little video clips, about a really dark topic. I can't tell you how many people have sent me messages and said, "Oh my god, I didn't know this was a thing. I've been living this for 5 years, and, you just explained my life. I swear we are married to the same person." And a whole bunch of that, there's, people who sent me messages on TikTok that said, I wish you were around 20 years ago, when I went through this, but thank you for articulating exactly what my life was like for, during those really dark times. So we had a 4-year separation. I want a huge party. Yes. COVID kind of puts a damper on those divorce parties, but my divorce party, it actually worked out really. It was interesting timing. I had a friend who was opening a little lounge bar, and it was about a week before he opened. And he said, "Hey, before we open, let's throw a big party here." And so when I say I had a big party, I had a big party at a bar lounge, and it was a lot of fun. Let's see. Angie loves TikTok. I know. You know what? It's kind of addicting. And it's funny because my daughter's greatest fear is that I'll show up in one of her friends' TikTok feeds. But I think it's a pretty good platform for separating, what your interests are. That's what you're going to get. I know that I've kind of was pleasantly surprised how many people are on that platform talking about narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic abuse. I've actually connected with a gentleman on there who is a diagnosed narcissist, and talk about fascinating, and he's admitted he's using the platform to get feed, but he's also educating people on what it's really like, what they're really, their MO. And he said, it doesn't matter if I'm getting feed from a negative source or a positive source, it's all feed. And I would much rather do it this way, where I'm helping people and educating people, rather than, I'm sure, torturing his poor wife and things like that. So, and here's the thing. I have such a tremendous amount of compassion for anyone who has been diagnosed in the cluster B category, whether it's borderline, antisocial, the sociopaths, narcissism. And that sounds weird to a lot of people. How can you have compassion for monsters? They didn't choose to be born that way. Nobody at 5 years old says, "Hey, I want the direction of my life to go on a really dark path where I'm going to torment people and live with absolute internal chaos and, conflict." And, nobody would choose that path. I have a tremendous amount of compassion for my ex-husband as a human being, because what is a life void of love, connection, being true and authentic? I can't imagine what is the point of even breathing. I don't know. I just So from that angle, I do. I have a lot of compassion for what we're all going through. We're going to fight tooth and nail to protect our kids from these individuals. But he, the TikTok, the guy who is, openly talking, it's real, he is raw and authentic, and I applaud him for doing that. So um, I'm gonna look here and see. The piece of paper is poorly written, full of loopholes, even with supervised visits required for him. Good for you for supervised visits, though. Those can be really hard to get. I learned that, they almost think of supervised visits as a slap on the wrist, that, or a slap on the hand. What I always get sayings wrong, so just roll up with me if I use things wrong all the time, and I just accept. Uh, that is it. But they use it as a punishment to kind of tell them, if you continue on this path, this is what's going to happen. There are times where they just throw supervised visits at people, and that's their reality. But for the most part, I do think they use it as a punishment and hopefully a wake-up call for them. That's what I found. I remember when I had supervised visits ordered, I was so relieved. And then the next court date 3 weeks later, they released him from that. So, and then it just became, another smaller roller coaster on this journey of supervised visits, not supervised visits. Supervised visits, now we're going to give him another chance, to the point we finally got an order for permanent supervised visits, and now he's completely gone. So that's a moot point. But anyway, let's dive in, and I have some questions that came through. I have a victim protective order due to death threats and emotional child abuse. Our temporary divorce order says we communicate only via a parenting app. FaceTime did not get added to the court order, even though they were agreed on. So it sounds like it was discussed maybe, but it didn't make it into the final order. The GAL recommended not to answer his insane questions about the kids or anything non-child related on the app. 6 weeks ago, my attorney said stop responding because it was just crazy nonsense. 3 to 4 weeks ago, my attorney, advised no more FaceTime because he was promising the kids things he can't follow up with, and being abusive. It's all recorded. Because it's not in the court order, it can't come back on me. How do you feel about this recommendation, since you're very pro Yellow Rock? Respond to the BS with canned responses. What are your thoughts on protective orders changing the game? I have to give my disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. I am definitely not qualified to give anyone legal advice. I've been part of the court system through my own case and all of yours for 10 years. And so I can only share what I would do if I were facing a similar situation. And if FaceTime calls are not in the court order and it's a protective order, I would take that really seriously. I see so many times where they tend to want to be, we're good natured, we are optimistic by nature, we see the best in people, the rose colored glasses. And when we violate the court order, I see that court order as a very firm boundary, one that you didn't set, one that the court set. And so a lot of times when people deviate from the court order, and sometimes that's at the advice of your attorney, it muddies the water. And then when you try to hold the other party responsible for violation of the order, the judge is kind of looking at it going, doesn't sound like anybody's taking the order seriously. So for me personally, I've always taken the court order as somewhat of my Bible. I follow it to the T. And one of the things I would say to my ex-husband is, I look forward to getting to a place in our co-parenting relationship where we can be more flexible on these things, but we're not there yet. And then if somebody in the court were to read that, my judge would have kind of gone, she's hopeful. It's not she's saying that she's bitter and rigid and never going to compromise. She's saying right now this is my boundary. And I remember one time we had a supervisor who was horrible. And it was supposed to be some type of therapeutic supervision, reunification BS. And she was, she didn't even seem to care about my court order. We had 2 hours of supervised visits allotted, and she was trying to increase it to 3 hours and combine days and give him 4 hours on one day because and I said to her, I am dealing with a person who has absolutely no regard for boundaries. And when the court issues a boundary like this, it took me a long time to get this piece of paper to finally put up a boundary with this person. And I don't feel comfortable deviating from the judge's orders. It's a way to call the person out on it without completely going head to head. It ended up that way anyway, but um, I obviously you have to follow your attorney's advice. But and I don't know anything about what your protective order says or allows. But if it were me personally, I would follow that order to a T. Um, when my ex-husband completely left the picture, basically his ego could not handle supervised visits, and he just jumped ship and he was gone for 15 months. A lot of people would have closed that door and said, thank God I don't have to communicate with this guy anymore. I continued to. And I think that it helped me so much in court when he did try to come back into the picture, and I was able to show all of these emails I had sent every 3 months saying, hey, I just wanted to check in. Can you let me know your intentions? Do you intend to come back? Because I would like to communicate these things to their therapist so she can work with them. And so, one of the things that I feel I did really well in my own case was show myself to be an amazing co-parent. I didn't care who was on the other side of that equation. My authentic truth was that I was a great co-parent. But court orders, going back to that, I would not personally deviate from that at all. So I would follow your attorney's advice. But if there are ways that you can continue yellow rocking that don't violate the order, maybe it's like I did, sending updates about the kids. I used to send report cards and things like that to show that I was still communicating, even though he was incapable of it. The court expects us to co-parent until they deem the other party is incapable of co-parenting. So, and there's no rule book. We're all doing the best we can. And let's see some of the comments. I was turned down for a protective order. The threshold does not meet the need when dealing with a problematic individual. I remember finally getting up the courage to call the local DV agency after I left the shelter and saying, do I qualify for an order? And it was the, checklist of, has he ever threatened your life? Has he hit you? All those things. And it's no, no, no. And even by a DV agency, I was made to feel like an idiot for even calling. And I hope that times have changed from 10 years ago, because I know my experience with my local women's shelter in that regard was not the most positive one, unfortunately. So let's see. The next question is phone calls in general. What so many of these individuals, toxic people, use the phone as an avenue into your life, especially now with FaceTime and Skype and all of those. They truly can have a window into your home, into your life. And we all know that they use it as a tool to get information from your kids it's almost like a dog peeing on a tree where they're marking their territory. They're letting you know I'm still here. I'm in your home. Invest in a lot of sage, walk around saging your house after. It's the phone calls are such a problematic piece to all of this, but again, it goes towards us showing ourselves to be the best co-parent, but documenting the issue and continuing to put them in front of the court. And my I have a very much a chip away at it mentality to where, okay, the court order allows for very invasive communication that is in my home, that is being used as another form of abuse when it comes to my kids. And, I hear situations all over the scale on this, from the kids who really want to talk to the other parent to the point where it causes problems in your life because they're always on the phone and you know what a feed supply that's giving to the other parent. And it's all manipulation and toxicity to the kid who is hiding under the table because they don't want to talk to the parent. And, it's a really difficult topic, and there are so many variations that I see that is really hard to address in general. For me personally, it was my kids, they had a phone that was just for communication with him on my parenting time and with me on his parenting time. And our court order, we got it to the point, that chip away mentality, where first it's just open ended, a free for all. And then when you're documenting the problems and the issues and continuing to put it in front of the court, I had an advantage that, well, I don't know if you could call it an advantage, but I didn't have an attorney to tell me, no, that's not enough to put in front of the court. I was putting everything in front of the court because I was my own attorney. So, my mentality when it came to the phones, I kept putting the things, he's using it to drill them about their day, about our lives, about, all of these things. He's saying very age inappropriate things to them. He's putting them in the middle. Um, he's using the opportunity when he's on speakerphone to blast me in front of the kids. There were so many times where I had to just end the call. And, continuing to put it in front of the court, the judge finally said, great, if nobody has anything to hide, I'm going to put it in the order that Miss Swidden can record all phone calls. And that was a game changer. And there were times where I did, and there were times where I didn't, but he never knew when. And I captured some pretty bizarre things that he was saying. So we chipped away at that, to where the kids were in control of when and for how long their calls went. When I hear of a 2-year-old who is forced to stay on the phone for 45 minutes, because it's such a feed supply for the other party, it makes me sick. I can't imagine. I actually have a grandchild, through my marriage to Glenn, and his oldest son and my daughter-in-law have a little one, and best thing ever. But so I have a grandchild who's he'll be 2 in August. I cannot imagine forcing him to stay on a call for 5 minutes, let alone 45 minutes. And so some of your stories just break my heart, because I know it's another form of abuse and it's terrorism in your own home. So, stay strong, keep documenting all of these things, because at some point someone will listen. But it's frustrating when you feel like, you're shouting from the rooftops and no one cares. Um, how do you get the court to understand the emotional abuse? I get the feeling that the commissioner involved in the case thinks I'm full of it. Very much a marathon mentality. I can tell you that my commissioner thought I was absolutely full of it and hyper reactive and all of those things for about 3 years. And then he would start to entertain. There's this family court. I don't know how long you've been in this battle, but I do see what I call the family court grace period, where for the first 2 years, they really lump you both into the same conflict category, high conflict. And so it takes a long time to extract yourself from that and to show the other party to be the problem. And that's through really meticulous documentation. I do have a documentation workshop online. If you go to the One Mom's Battle, I think it's next week actually. I do them once a month. And if you go to the One Mom's Battle website, click on online courses, and you can get signed up for that, because for me, so much of the emotional abuse was through documentation. And a lot of it becomes hearsay or he said, she said. One of the things that I did, and I talk about it, I have another online course about strategic communication and kind of upping your documentation through your communication. Because when most of what is said is hearsay or he said, she said, how do you capture that and elevate it to being factual? If my daughters came home and said, dad said this about you, I would then go to my email, and I would send him an email and say, hey, Seth, I just wanted to bring something to your attention. This morning, Piper came home and said, X, Y, and Z, and it really caught me off guard. I hope we're both working to ensure a strong, healthy bond between both parents. And I would hope that she misinterpreted something you said. And then, there were times, depending on if his mask was on tight or sitting on the table, that he would, fire back at me and whatever. But it was capturing those, taking them from he said, she said to documentation, getting him to engage in the communication to where then I could put it in front of the court and say, he admitted that he used to call me T-Rex, Tina, Tyrannosaurus Rex, big mean dinosaur, holding him accountable. And he would fire back and admit it in email. And sometimes, he was smarter than that, but those things, capturing them, thinking outside of the box, thinking strategically so that you can elevate this to a level where the courts care. But it takes a lot of time. It didn't take me 10 years in family court because it just always went my way. There's going to be so many battles that you lose, and that can feel defeating. And what's the purpose? And the system's broken, and they've both lumped us into the same category. Your goal is to remove yourself from the conflict at every opportunity. And over time, that will go in your favor if you have a judge who is halfway decent. So many of these judges are misogynistic, narcissistic, not pleasant people themselves. So when you're in front of one of those, your hands are tied, but they change positions, or they retire, or who knows. Family court is kind of the bottom of the barrel when it comes to a judge's rank. They don't, most of them, there are some who actually choose to be in family court, but it's, in a lot of times, it's almost considered a punishment, and they don't want to be there. So that comes through in their judgments. Let's see. The courts put the children in the middle. I'm forced to rely on the children said. My ex weaponizes your suggestions of email confirmation. It puts me on the defense. My eldest is compliant. That's so hard. And it sounds like you're dealing with one who's a little bit more on his game. And, and there can be variations. I know my ex, there were times where he was rock solid. Whatever was going on in his life kept him, whether it was in a new relationship and he was getting a positive feed supply or whatever, to where there was nothing that could get him to drop that mask. And then there were other times, for whatever reason, maybe job loss, maybe who knows, discord in his family, where the mask would be hanging off. And then there's other times where the mask is sitting on the table. And so, keep at it. It can feel really frustrating at times. Somebody sent in a question that said, my ex posted a Facebook Live video at the last exchange of our son. It was at the police station. There were two cops standing by because the exchange did not go well. He had the audacity to send the video to me. In the video, he was narrating the entire time to his audience on Facebook Live. He made me look really bad. I am so embarrassed because so many people on his friends list know me. He said derogatory things about me and he lied. Also, in the video, my car and my son can be seen. In fact, he put the camera phone right in our son's face. He told my son to wave and greet people he knew were watching. Of course, our son is 4 years old and had no idea what was going on and was very excited to see his dad. My ex took advantage of this opportunity to make himself look like the hero. I heard the courts really don't weigh behavior like this heavily into custody battles unless the child is being harmed in some way. My judge would have taken that really seriously. I don't know if yours would. I see people get in trouble for things like a Pinterest post or, an Instagram post, let alone blasting a child on Facebook Live. I see people get in trouble for when their kids come home taking pictures of bruises or marks on them, because when the child is aware. I've always said, diaper rashes, things like that with my kids. I waited until they were asleep to take, if I were going to take a photo of a really bad sunburn or mark or something like that. I waited until they were asleep so that they didn't know that I was doing that. There were occasions where I deviated from that, but for the most part, the courts don't like to see things like that. And in my opinion, they really wouldn't want to see something like this. And that is just horrible. And I think it's hard for us to see when we're so emotionally tied into that. But I'll tell you that even without knowing all of this that I know, if I saw somebody doing that on Facebook Live, it would say a lot about that person, even as an innocent, viewer of that material. That's really harmful for the child, really bizarre behavior. And the fact that he sent it to you, um, that is a gold mine. And that, I don't know that I would rush into court with that specifically if it were me personally. But would I add that to my next? Always used to keep, I called it like a family court wish list of things that I wanted changed the next time that we were in court, or the things that I wanted to address. And that would have definitely gone on my family court wish list because that should not continue. That's heartbreaking. Um, let's see some of the comments. I'm forced to rely on the children, said. I'm going on year 5 and still in the discovery phase. He's not giving financial info. Since now I've been lumped into the high conflict, but now the light is on with him. How do you get the recording authorized? Yeah, so there's, a lot of great comments. I encourage you, support each other. This is a community of people, and most of them are walking this battle alone. It is such an isolating journey. And so, I love this community. I love the support that I see. And sometimes I read things, I'm like, that's actually fantastic advice. But it is the internet. So, don't get your legal advice from the internet. Always consult with your attorney on these things. Somebody asked me my opinion on psychological evaluations. And I have a journey with that topic alone. In the beginning, I was rushing into court at every single opportunity, begging for a psych eval for my ex-husband. I was willing to take one. Usually, if one person is ordered, you're both ordered. There are cases where that's not true, but if I were able to go back in time, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't ask for a psych eval ever, in my personal case, and it may be different for others. The reason is I see diagnosed narcissists and sociopaths still get 50-50 custody. with a diagnosis. And first of all, a diagnosis is nearly impossible to get. The psychologist is usually going to say that they have very high narcissistic traits, which and they won't cross over and diagnose them. That's a whole nother topic. There's reasons why. Um, but when you have that, if somebody has high traits, that doesn't mean anything. You don't have a diagnosis. And in the eyes of the court, because there's very little, if any, research on personality disorders and how they affect child custody situations, even if you did get a firm diagnosis, you have nothing to fall back on to show from a research perspective what this individual, how they affect a parenting situation or a co-parenting situation. And the education on narcissism is lacking so much. When a judge reads that somebody has high narcissistic traits, in their mind they're like, it's on Facebook a lot, posting selfies, or they don't understand what that truly means for us and for our kids. And that's the hard part. So I see people spend $10,000-$20,000 to get psych evals that do them absolutely no good. And then you have to ask yourself, how am I going to present in that psych eval? Because the reality is, so many of us have been so affected by the abuse from the relationship, by the post-separation abuse after you leave, that it comes across. I know that if I had to go to court today for my own case, I'd be a mess. And, I'm human and it affects me greatly. So, how would I come across in a psych eval? Probably highly anxious, um, major PTSD, which I think weighs in and has an effect. I remember just doing an online type psych eval, and one of the questions was, do you believe somebody is out to hurt you? And my answer was yes, I do believe somebody was out to hurt me. So when the results came out, it said that I was highly paranoid. And I'm like, but wait, I am justified in feeling that way. I don't think, random people are out to get me. That's not what I meant when I answered that question. So that, experience, which was very informal, kind of clued me into what a typical survivor's results would show as, because my truth was, yeah, I, look around. I am not the person walking, looking at my phone. I am constantly aware of my surroundings, because I do think that this person has the ability and the desire to hurt me. And that's a horrible way to live, but I know many of you get it. Let's see some of the comments. It breaks my heart the way courts seem to care more about the parents than the emotional well-being of the children. Yeah, the courts are focused on parental rights and not on children's rights. And that's really, really the one of the biggest parts of, the biggest problems in this whole system is, um, parental rights carry so much weight, and they shouldn't. Don't do psych evals. They do not test for personality disorders, but they do test for symptoms of abuse. In my case, the evaluator completely dismissed everything my toxic ex did. Labeled me as mentally ill due to symptoms of abuse. My ex has since used the eval report to further smear campaign. Those are the problems. Tina, my thought on that question was exactly the same. I don't think most people are out to get me, but this person and his flying monkeys sure as hell are. Absolutely. And I hear you and I validate you, Michelle. And it's, it's a hell that I wouldn't wish on anyone, living this way. And so I know so many of us feel your fear and your pain. And our court hearing cases about the upcoming visitation during the pandemic. I don't want my child to fly out of state. What are my options? I would love for, this is such an unprecedented time and situation that we're dealing with. And, I don't know that anyone has the answers. I know that so many people are struggling right now with issues related to the pandemic and visitation. Um, I wouldn't want my kids on a plane right now at all. I haven't even taken my kids to the grocery store, let alone stick them on an airplane. Um, if you are in, if anybody has experience, positive, negative, a recent court case that has addressed this, please share it in the comments because, again, I don't have all the answers and I haven't had to deal with anything like this. Nobody has. Um, Autumn asks, did you always give Seth the girls when he wasn't giving you a validation of address? I did. And I feel that I'm glad I did, as hard as it was. For people who haven't read my book, uh, Divorcing a Narcissist, One Mom's Battle, this was a big topic in the beginning of my case. I live in San Luis Obispo. He lived 4 hours north in San Francisco at the time. And so when he would come to the area to have his visits, I never knew where my kids were going to be. Um, some weekends, he was keeping them at his brother's house, who, for those of you who have followed my story, we are year 4, still waiting on a trial for his brother, who has been labeled as the biggest child molester predator in the history of our county. That's a whole nother topic. But so there were some weekends he was violating the court order and keeping our kids at his brother's house. There were other times where he would have them bouncing around to hotels. Sometimes he would drive them north to San Francisco, 4 hours away. I had no idea where they were. He was giving me addresses that didn't exist. He was known to give me addresses inside gated communities. There was a point where I was so desperate to prove that he was lying and to know where my kids were that I got a realtor friend to drive me into gated communities and take pictures that the address was a big vacant dirt lot and that nobody lived there. Those were some of the worst times of my entire life. That feeling of knowing that somebody has weaponized your kids just to torture you and torment you, and that the court is putting, at that time, we were both in the high conflict category, and the judge hated our name on his roster. Um, and so it took me time and time again of putting it in front of the court and begging them, and they finally started holding him accountable. The judge verbally reprimanded him in court multiple times, and then it got to the point where after year 2 that they just stripped him of overnight visits. And I remember the judge saying, Miss Swithin is now going to be able to go to sleep at night knowing that her children are in their beds safe. And that was such a huge moment in my custody battle. And it didn't pave the way for the rest of it to be smooth sailing, but it was a huge moment, where I was incredibly grateful to the court for finally listening. Um, some Is it? I think it's Gigi. Am I pronouncing your name right? I'm Gigi to my grandson, but I want to make sure I'm saying that right. Gigi said, I have a psychology degree and can tell you most professionals tasked with evaluations are not trained to understand testing of NPD. MMPI 2 results need to be interpreted, needs interpretation. Yeah, the testing that is used, it's just everything is so archaic and isn't designed to help what we needed, what we need to get across to the court. And then, like I said, even if you get a positive psych eval, how do you have anything to prove what that means to your kids? That's the problem, is how much weight does a court ordered co parenting counselor have when they report back to the court or are subpoenaed to testify. It depends on the judge, depends on the therapist, it depends on their reputation in the court. Like here's an example. In the county that I'm familiar with, there's a co-parenting counselor who's very respected by the court, and so her opinion and voice is probably going to have some weight. There's others who aren't as credible, or they're known to be biased, for moms or for dads, to where it may not have much of an impact at all because, of those notions. Let's see. Or short, yes, I'm pronouncing it right. Short for Genevieve. Well, I appreciate you, Gigi, being here every week. I know you're one of the regulars, and I love seeing all of your names pop up. And what is the best book guidance for narcissistic violence, parenting, autism? As I would love if anybody has, if you're talking about one of my books, each one has a different angle to it. I actually have them right here, and I can show you real quick. This, I feel like everybody needs. I don't care what you're dealing with. The Narc Decoder helps you to find humor. It's understanding the language of the narcissist. And basically what I've done is my own emails or messages from Seth, and then I process them through what I call the Narc Decoder, and it tells you what they really mean and how I responded. And then I also had opened it up for other people to send in their emails and things, and it even says like snap, fizzle, pop, and it decodes what it is. Divorcing a Narcissist, One Mom's Battle is my personal journey and story through the court system, and my victory. So people always ask me, how'd you win custody? I'm like, it took me a whole book to write, to share that. So that's the one I would recommend. And Rebuilding After the Storm, it's for anywhere in your custody battle. You can start rebuilding no matter where you are. And then this one, Advice from the Battlefield, this is probably one that most people start with because it's a compilation of advice from lots of different people. So I'll pose a question about custody related to narcissism, and then we take 5 different answers from people. And so we show a wide variety of input. And then if you have kids, probably ages like 8 to 11, Lemonade Life, and it's very much a journal format about any topic. It's not specific to narcissism. It can be for a kid who's gone through divorce, a death, pandemic, whatever is going on in life. But I'm going to go ahead and sign off. If you are interested, I think I have 9 spots available. This starts on June 20th, and it's called Lemonade, Co-Parenting with a Narcissist. So we're going to have 6 Zoom meetings that are about an hour and a half. I'm trying to keep the group to about 20, 25 people so that everybody has time to ask questions, share their stories, be heard. And then there's also a private online forum that will go indefinitely. It will always, as long as Facebook allows secret private groups, it will be there. These will be your group members, your people, to share and support each other beyond the 6-month program. So if you're interested in that, you can email me. You're going to get an auto reply, and the link is in the auto reply to sign up for that. And if I think it's probably going to sell out pretty quick. If it does, I will be taking names for a wait list for a whole nother group. So don't be discouraged if you try to sign up and we're filled. I'll be doing another one of those. And my email address is tina@tinaswithin.com. And my last name is the word within with an S before it. So tina@tinaswithin.com. So, okay, everyone, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you every single Saturday morning at 8 a.m. This is one of the highlights of my week. So thank you for getting up and joining me and having coffee with me. Take care, everyone. Bye.